Hey, I'm so glad. Jim, come to the park. Say hey, Uncle Andy.
Hi.
Now? All right.
I'm sorry I didn't come back.
Oh, I'm glad you came back. Love you. Close the door behind you, okay?
But I forgot to give you a big hug.
People
You gave me a big hug. That was good.
people have been asking for that appearance.
It happened.
It did. It was right at the beginning.
All right, looks like we're on.
Yeah.
Just wait just a minute. Let everybody get on.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up here on my iPad also.
Yeah, it's just starting to get nice. So Emily took the kids out to the park for a little bit.
Cool. Are people mostly staying in still around there?
I think so. I don't know how it's going to change just because, I mean, it is starting, the weather's getting pretty nice. And so
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine people staying in as much. But a lot of people that are out are, you know, wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it'll just be more people doing that and covering up and trying to do all that stuff to stay safe.
Yeah.
What do you think? Go and get started here.
Yeah. All right.
Good to see everybody. We're in Philippians 1, starting in verse 12 today. And for the past couple of chats, we've been looking at the book of Philippians, which is a letter that Paul wrote from prison, which you would think would be a pretty depressing and sad letter, but it's a letter all about how to achieve and hold on to joy. And throughout the book, well, we've noted that a lot of the stuff that Paul talks about is how if we will work in our minds to have the right kind of mentality, that we can have joy in the Lord, no matter what's going on, no matter if we're in prison or a lot of other things that we're going to get into in particular here in verses 12 through 26 today. So today we're going to be really zeroing in on what Andy shared a while back with one way to think about each of the chapters in Philippians. It just describes a different kind of mindset that's essential for joy. And the one today is having a singular, single-minded focus. And so that's kind of where we're at. What else do you think we need to say before we jump into the text here? Just kind of background or big picture stuff?
No, that's good. I mean, what we've covered in verses 1 through 11 is just his greeting and his thankfulness for them, his relationship with them. It's special and intimate. A great prayer that we spent our time on last discussion in verses 9 through 11, praying that their love would abound in real knowledge and real discernment. So now we're going to get to what he really wants to say to them in the letter. I think verse 12 is going to start with, "Now I want you to know."
Mm-hmm.
They've been waiting to hear from him, and this is what he has to say. So you want to read a bit?
Yeah, sounds good. What do you think? Maybe you read through that first paragraph in the middle of verse 18, or you want me to go all the way to 26?
Let's get the whole context. Let's do 12 through 26 so we can just walk back through that.
All right. Philippians 1, verse 12. "Now I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel, so that my imprisonment in the cause of Christ has become well known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and to everyone else, and that most of the brethren, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear. Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I'm appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition rather than from pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed. And in this I rejoice, yes, and I will rejoice, for I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and the provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, according to my earnest expectation and hope, that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And I do not know which to choose, but I'm hard pressed from both directions, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better. Yet to remain on the flesh is more necessary for your sake. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith, so that your proud confidence in me may abound in Christ Jesus through my coming to you again.
Very good. Oh man, there's so many good things in this section. We'll see if we can get through it in this discussion. It strikes me that Paul being in prison and Paul being the thinker that he was, you can hear him working through like all the things he's like, there's all these things going on. There's all these potential circumstances. There's all these like ways this could go. And you can see him thinking through all of it and finally saying, all right, here's what I want you to know. Here's where I've this is the perspective I've adopted in this.
Yeah.
But even through it, as much as he's saying he's joyful and he's looking at this the right way and he's finding the good in it, he's still saying like, this is a hard situation for me. I'm hard pressed in this. And I think just that's instructive for us. And sometimes I think when I'm faced with a challenge or, a change in my circumstances, that I'm supposed to just from the very first moment say, hey, it's all going to work out and joy is mine and I've got this and I see all the good things in it. But I think if you look close, you can see that Paul is wrestling still. I'm hard pressed between these things. Like I'm really working at having this right perspective and attitude. And then he wants to share, I think, with the Philippians that wrestling match, that process, so that they can learn to find the joy in it.
The very fact that he can list off all these things that are going on or that he's thinking about or whatever means that he's thought about them a lot.
For sure.
Like I wonder if we had like his personal diary or somebody reporting what Paul said or what his prayers were like the day he found out about the guys who were preaching out, to make him look bad or whatever.
Right.
Maybe it was exactly like this. Maybe he instantly thought that, or maybe not. And I don't know. So I'm not trying to suppose either direction, but I think it's reasonable that it, like you said, it shows that he's really been thinking about everything, and he's showing his thought process and how he's worked it all out.
Yeah.
And even right now, besides your point where he says, "Hey, I'm hard pressed," he's still talking about deliverance. It's not like he's sitting back like, "Oh, this is no big deal." Like he's looking toward deliverance, whatever that may mean, and however God gives it. He recognizes it's in a good situation.
Yeah, very good. So, in some ways, we pointed this out before. This is a thank you letter. I don't know, you being in a situation where you're preaching somewhere, and I think you rely on support to come from some places, people that support your work.
Mm-hmm.
You write those support letters. That's kind of what this is. This is a support letter where they've found out that Paul's in prison. His ministry has essentially stopped, like what he's been normally doing in his life has stopped. And they're sort of waiting to hear from him to find out, like, okay, what's going on? Where's he at? How's this going to work out? I'm trying to picture you being in a situation like this and receiving a letter from you. I'll tell you, if it was me, verse 12 would sound something like this. Now, I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances are really, really difficult, struggling. Unfortunately, I'm not getting to do any of the stuff that I used to do. I'm sorry that your support isn't going towards the right things, because I know you supported me here to be doing this, this, and this, and I can't. That's not how he talks.
Yeah.
Like, it's a shocking thing to say in verse 12, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress or the furtherance of the gospel. That's such a cool word, such a cool idea. I've read that in the Greek, it's like it was used as a nautical term, like of a ship that was making headway, even though like the winds and the waves were against it. It's sort of like a word that means advancement in spite of opposition. I think they used it for like the Army Corps of Engineers that would like cut trees in front of the army, that would move forward. So like it wasn't easy progress, but it was progress nonetheless. And he says, I want you guys to know that this is what's going on with me. I know the circumstances are hard. You know they are, but there's good in it if you look close. And then Paul's going to list them. So let's talk about, well, you can comment on that, but he's going to list the reasons why he thinks this is good.
Yeah. No, you saying that just it's funny, like just a couple of days ago, I was thinking about one of those letters because it's coming up on time for me to send one out. And I was thinking, like, how can I write this and not be a huge bummer, you know?
Yeah.
But a lot of that is probably what that is it reflects that my mentality is I can tend to look at the bummer elements of our circumstances more than a lot of the good things that are happening, you know. This letter, I know what I want to be like. Day 47 or whatever we're on, quarantine. The neighbors had another midnight birthday party. True story, by the way, not making that up. Midnight birthday party above us, like crazy drinking, all that kind of stuff. It was wild. Like, you know, but it's easy to get caught up in that stuff and not look at all the things, which is what Paul does. I mean, that is what's amazing is every single thing that we would look at if we were in Paul's, or I would look at if I was in Paul's shoes and just be bummed about. And at best, I think my best case normally would be just try to ignore it, just try to push it out of my mind. Paul instead takes it, says, hey, this is a really good opportunity. I'm chained up to these guards, preaching the gospel to them. The whole Praetorian Guard has heard the gospel. So much so that he's going to come to the end of the book and he's going to talk about Caesar's household hearing the gospel and stuff like that. You know, the thing about, hey, what I'm going through, yeah, it stinks, but you know what? It's making other people bolder to preach the gospel in other circumstances. And hey, there's these jerks who are doing this out of envy and strife. At least the message of Christ, apparently they were preaching the true gospel. They weren't preaching from a right motivation. I mean, every single one of these is just a really bad thing. Paul pivots it and says, actually, this is a real advantage for the kingdom. And that's a really impressive mentality. And I want to think more like that.
Yeah, I agree. I'll tell you though, this is this is difficult because when you have conversations with people that are going through hard things or you're going through a hard thing, there's always the person that says, hey, come on, like be real, like be a realist. Like this isn't, I know you're looking for some good thing in this or the silver lining, but the reality is, and people will say that I'm a realist, you know, like I look at something and I'm just real about it. Well, this is not to say that Paul wasn't real about it. Paul knew he was in chains. He doesn't, like, he says, I've got chains on my wrists. But to help somebody who struggles with seeing the good in it, he says, I'm chained to somebody. Like, yeah, there's chains, but there's a guy on the other end of the chains that's never heard about Jesus. And now they all know about him. I have a friend that supported me, Bernice Boys, a lady in California. She used to send me support. One of the greatest evangelists I know, always talking to people. And she had a heart attack, and Barry Kirchville went to visit her, and she's laying there in the bed, like struggling. And she says, come here, come here. And he gets close and she whispers to him, next Tuesday, I got to study with that nurse over there. Like, I mean, like everybody else would look at the thing and say, like, this is terrible, Bernice. And she'd say, no, I met this nurse. And Paul would say, I met these guards.
Yeah.
And what I love about this is this letter being read to the Philippians. The Philippian jailer was probably in the congregation. And if he had been down about Paul's situation, he might have perked up and said, you know what, everybody, he's right. Yeah. I remember when he was in prison, he was singing songs and he got to me. This isn't bad news, you know? But I want to talk a little bit about this, like this whole idea of like, is it okay for Christians to look at a world, there's a lot of difficult things, and find the good in it and talk about it and not be called people who stick their heads in the sand or not being real? Is it just a fantasy world if we're finding the good? What do you think about that? Like,
well, to me, whenever you were first talking about that idea of being a realist, I think Paul would say something on the lines of, yeah, I am a realist. My perspective on reality is shaped by the gospel, though. It's not shaped by things in the world. Right. And this is, you know, he's going to say more things about that as the letter progresses. But to me, I think that's the thing. So it's not that we ignore problems. In some ways, we're more tuned in to just how devastating different problems are in the world. I mean, Paul would talk in other letters about weeping and crying and losing sleep and all this kind of stuff. I mean, he understood that there were real problems in people's lives. But our vision of reality has been reshaped because we see it through the lens of the death and resurrection of Christ and eternity and judgment day and all that kind of stuff. So to me, that's at least, I don't think that's a full answer to that, but I think that's a big part of it. We're realists. We're more realistic than anybody actually, because of that stuff.
Yeah, very good. I mean, when you have a spiritual perspective and you believe that there's more going on in the universe than just what's happening in your nation or in your neighborhood or in your world, it changes perspectives. This goes back to what we talked about with Psalm 23. David's descriptions of what his life was like in Psalm 23 were not matched with the physical reality, but it was perspective. I watched an old movie recently. Did you ever see the movie Pollyanna? Did you ever
Yeah,
see that
Emily was
movie?
just watching that with the kids the other day. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, an old Disney movie, Haley Mills. This girl comes into a town, people are kind of depressed, and she's had a hard life, but she was taught by her father to find the good in any situation. I mean, that principle of like, find something good in this. It is a biblical principle. Like God's always talked about that. I mean, he used the cross that way. This is a terrible thing, but there's good in it. I mean, there was the curses in the garden on mankind, and he's still talking about the crushing of the serpent and the seed, like the seed of hope, and like the good news that's going to come from these terrible things. We just need to be better. I need to be better at this thing that Paul's doing here.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting to me too is just how active he is about, like, he's choosing to have a perspective on all these things, circumstantially or just sort of, I guess, naturally, to use a word. There's nothing good about being in prison. There's nothing good about people bad mouthing you. There's nothing good about you being far away from your friends who you could support and encourage, even the ones who are trying to do right. But he's actively choosing, like, all right, how can this be? How can there be an advantage here? How can this be a good thing? And how can I do my part in that? He's choosing. Even the thing about rejoicing, this isn't, the joy here is not an emotional response to things that are going on. Even the way he says it in verse 18, what then? Only in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. Not in my chains. If I just thought about my chains, I'd probably cry. If I just thought about the fact that I can't go visit all my friends, I'd probably cry. And I probably am. I mean, I bet Paul was crying sometimes about that. But in what he could think about that was good for the kingdom, for Christ, for the lost, for eternity, for people, in this I'll rejoice. And then you can kind of see how much he's almost willing himself to it. Yes, and I will rejoice. And I know maybe some of that's like, are you serious, Paul? You're rejoicing? Yes, and I will. Maybe it's also something he was telling himself. I rejoice and I will rejoice. It's a choice and a chosen perspective on things and mindset.
Yeah, very good. So a couple principles to take from this, with the thing that, okay, I'm in prison, I can't be out there preaching, but I can preach in here. In Colossians 4, he was writing that letter from prison as well. When he asked the Colossians to pray for him in Colossians 4, he says that a door would be open for the word. What's cool about that is he's asking for an open door behind locked prison doors. Like, so yeah, the world closes in me, I feel locked behind something. The point of that is God can open doors behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. That's a good principle. The other thing that you were mentioning, he's got his critics out there who are preaching out of envy and strife, thinking to make things worse. I'm going to ask you about that. Like, what do you think they were doing? I'm curious. Yeah. But the principle where he says, hey, the gospel's being proclaimed. Look, I really need to learn this. This is really important for me. The power of the gospel is not in who's saying it or even why it's being said. Like, it really doesn't have anything to do with the preacher. And I've grown up not thinking like that, oh, the gospel's only powerful if I hear that guy do it because he's so good at it and he said that a certain way. And that's not to say that speech shouldn't be seasoned with salt and that God gives abilities to people, but Paul believed the power of the gospel was in the gospel itself. And I love that he thinks like that. And I need to think like that more. Anyway.
Because it would probably make me more bold if the more I think that, because the times when I close my mouth or don't say things I think I need to say, it's usually about me. It's not usually because I'm not sure if this is true or not. It's I don't know if they'll listen to me, or I don't know if I'm the best person for this. I don't want to mess up. if we believe this, we'll just do it. We'll just say the things that are true, and we'll trust that God will do something with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think these guys were trying to do to make things worse? Like, how's it going to cause them distress? Were they out there trying to get the Romans more stirred up, or the Jews more stirred up, or?
I don't know. I've always wondered about that. I know because it talks about, let's see, what's the word I'm trying to, envy and strife.
Mhm.
I guess I've always assumed it was people kind of like, seems like they were in Corinth that would badmouth Paul. I know he writes good letters, but he's not really a good preacher or whatever. And that's what they were saying there. I don't know what it was now, but I could imagine things like, I mean, look, if Paul was a little smarter, a little more savvy, a little better with people, you guys know he's kind of rough. He's not a real nice guy to be around. He wouldn't be in this situation. I was there, like he could have been nicer to the Jews in Jerusalem, but he stirred them up with the way he was talking and he made it hard on himself. Or even just, he's kind of getting what he deserved. He's lived a bad life before. I don't know, but the fact that it says envy and strife, it seems to me that there were people that were trying to use Paul's situation to elevate themselves by saying, oh, Paul deserves this, or he put himself there, or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. When it comes to the envy and strife, I sort of picture it something like this. Paul's been sort of the center of attention for all this Gentile ministry. He's kind of the guy that everybody talks about.
Yeah.
And now he's locked up. And now it's like other preachers are like, hey, this is my chance to shine. I can become the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they think I'm going to stress Paul out here because he's going to see my ministry grow and it's going to bum him out. And Paul's like, I don't care about that. I just care about the gospel being preached. I think about, like, I've seen people get sick. Somebody goes on maternity leave. They're not at their job. Somebody else looks at that and says, ooh, this is my chance to sort of get ahead and put them down. And whatever, like, kind of politics goes on with that. Somebody that thinks like Paul thinks, hey, you know what? The work's getting done. It doesn't have to be me. Like, I don't have to be the one at the top. And it doesn't distress me. Like, my reputation isn't the point of this. We're going to learn that in chapter 2 as well.
Yeah.
So,
and not even that, but he's joyful about it.
Yeah.
Because of what's happening. He's excited about Christ being proclaimed. He's not really concerned about whether he's doing it or someone else is doing it or whatever. It doesn't matter to him.
Yeah. When I moved into this 2 preacher arrangement here, I had a lot of people tell me, preachers, hey, 2 preacher things are really hard, man. Like, there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of difficulty. I mean, I've been here 14 years now. But I don't even know what they're talking about. Like, honestly, like, I ended up with a guy, Rick Lanning, who doesn't have that kind of ego or that kind of thought about who's better, who's not, who people like more, who people don't. And there's just not a spirit of competition.
Yeah.
Like, we really do just rejoice when the other person does good work, and like, that's what's great. And so, but I credit places like this in scripture for helping me see that the right way.
Yeah. And in a way, these guys who are doing this for strife, and they're demonstrating themselves at the opposite mentality that Paul did. Paul sees all these bad things and he says, oh, let me see the Christ-centered good that can come out of this.
Yeah.
These other guys see a bad thing and they see an opportunity for their own selfish gain, which I know we're going to get more into selfishness and stuff in chapter 2, but this is kind of a precursor to that, where Paul's like, we're not about that in the kingdom of Christ. Like, we're not people who are trying to get our best or trying to elevate ourselves. We're trying to elevate Christ. And we all know people like that, who are envious people, who are always trying to be competitive and get up on other people, especially when they're down. They're not joyful people. Their minds are not filled with good stuff. They're not at peace. They're always kind of twisted up and kind of a mess because they're not thinking like this. So Paul, worst circumstances possible, he's good. These other guys, they're trying to take advantage of it. And they were not people who were in a good place.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about. We're going to run out of time. In verse 14, when he talks about one of the good things was more people were courageous to speak up. It's always seemed counterintuitive. It's like Paul's in prison and then people get brave. But I think that's how that works. I mean, when you see somebody do the right thing when you know that you should be, and maybe they end up suffering for it or whatever, you sort of start thinking, you know what, I need to be more courageous. Before I preached when I was a teenager, I heard a preacher say one time because of this text, he said, if what it takes to get Christians to talk about the gospel is to lock up all the preachers, then we should lock up all the preachers.
Mhm.
And honestly, like I remember when he said that, I thought, yeah, why don't I do more? Why don't I talk about it? And I think that's part of why I started being more active just as a Christian to talk about it. Anyway, I just love this section. I do. So,
Yeah.
all right, we need to keep moving through this.
Yeah.
So 18 through 20 down in there, the joy that he has, what he seems to know about how this is going to work out. You have thoughts about those verses?
I like I'm reading New American Standard today. I think that word in verse 20 where he says, Christ will even now as always be, isn't it some translations say magnified instead of exalted? Am I right about that?
Yeah, the New King James says that Christ will be magnified.
Yeah. I like that quite a bit.
I do too.
It's a cool way of thinking about your life, that there's value to your life as a Christian, and the things that you go through, even difficult things, are valuable because they can serve as a magnifying glass. It's something that blows up Christ in the world to make people see him better. He is what he is. He's it's not like we're making Christ intrinsically more or less valuable by what we do, but the way we live our lives can really bring that in a bigger way into people's eyes. Like, for instance, some guards who maybe they had heard about this Jesus movement, the Nazarene people or whatever, but they didn't know much about it until they met a guy who was respectful and kind and prayed all the time and talked to them about his King Jesus and all this kind of stuff. It magnified Christ. And I guess it's also a little bit of a warning that we can also shrink Jesus if we don't have this kind of mentality and mindset.
That's right. Yeah, the idea that God made us binoculars, you know what I mean? Like he gave us the job of being the lens, and Paul knew that. I mean, I loved that as a kid, having binoculars and you could like make things far away look bigger. The idea that somebody as small as me could make somebody as big as Jesus even bigger is such a cool idea.
Yeah.
But the idea that you can flip binoculars around, and because people look at that way, something looks smaller, what a responsibility that is.
Right.
And so that's why Paul says, like, it's an earnest expectation and hope. No matter what, whether he's living or whether he's dying, all he can think about is what will make Christ bigger in this.
Yeah.
A good thing for us to be thinking right now when we're going through distresses in this life. The way Christians talk about the world, the way Christians talk about other Christians, the way Christians talk about anything will have an impact on the way people see the Lord the way they should.
Yeah. And I mean, just generally the way you live your life, the way you spend your money, the way you engage in your social life and all that kind of stuff. And that seems to be verse 21. I just saw Michelle just posted Galatians 2:20, which is really similar to Philippians 1:21, right? Galatians 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ, no longer I who live, it's Christ who lives in me. For to me, Philippians 1:21, to live is Christ and to die is gain. That's what the whole thing is about. Everything in his life was all about trying to illuminate the world with the knowledge of Christ and to embody Christ as best he could and what he was doing and do things for Christ.
Yeah, that's great. You know, that thing he says in verse 19 about his deliverance will come through their prayers and the provision of the Spirit of Jesus. I've often wondered about that. If part of what he's saying is, and he comes to say, I think I'm going to get out of prison. But I think he's also saying, like, I'm going to be delivered from the difficulty of this situation by knowing that you care for me, you're praying for me, and that the Spirit of God is who helps us work through this. Like having the Spirit of God in our lives, where the fruit of the Spirit is love and peace and patience. And if I don't have the Spirit of God in my difficult circumstances, I'm not going to get through this. But I need the support and the prayers of others. And I love that way he talks about those two things.
Yeah.
Let's talk about.
Oh, go ahead. No,
I was going to ask. So verse 21 is it's almost an awkward verse. It's such a great verse, but the way he says that, I almost want to clean it up a little bit. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Like, what does somebody mean when they say, for me to live is Christ? Because I want to say, like, well, for me to live is to serve Christ or magnify Christ, or I want to put a word in there. Like, what does it mean that for me to live is Christ?
Yeah. Just a minute ago, you referenced Colossians. There's a pretty similar thing in Colossians. And he does add a word, but it's kind of the same thing in Colossians 3:11, where he says Christ is all and in all. Or in Colossians 3 and verse 4, he says, when Christ, who is our life. It makes me think of those, the bumper stickers people have that's like, I don't know, the mountains are life, or, swimming is life, or ball is life, or whatever,
Right.
This is like Paul's version of that, it seems to me. That's the way I read it, at least, especially looking at that parallel language in Colossians.
Yeah, I sometimes illustrate maybe what he's saying this way. I'll ask you, I'll just use you as the guinea pig here. Have you ever heard, probably you have, maybe this is going to backfire. Have you ever heard of George Hincapie?
No, man. Who is that?
You don't know who that is?
Uh,
All right, how about this? Have you ever heard of Lance Armstrong?
yeah.
Okay, so George Hincapie was part of the team that always rode with Lance Armstrong.
Was he the guy in the front?
They all switched. The whole team would switch. There were a number of riders that the whole point of them riding on the team, the only reason they rode was Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
Like, none of them cared about their name.
Gotcha.
George Hincapie is one of the best bike riders ever. But because the way the team was formed was to elevate this guy who's going to do the winning, they all did all this work not caring about who, like if you were to ask him, hey, why do you ride? He'd be like, for me to ride is Lance Armstrong. Like, you don't even know who I am. And I don't know, I just love the way that Paul says that. For me to live is Christ. And God made sure that Paul's name was known, but that wasn't what Paul was trying to accomplish.
Right. Yeah, that's a good illustration. I like that. I think I had heard about that because my dad watches college football some. He watches bull riding and he watches the Tour de France. Those are the three sports my dad watches. And I think he watches basketball with my brothers now too, but those are the three sports he watches. So yeah, no, that is really good. And that's the thing. I mean, I think it goes with that thing with Christ, who is our life. It was just all consuming for Paul. There was nothing else. So everything, whether he was in prison, whether people were nice to him, whether people weren't nice to him, whether he was with his friends, not with his friends, whatever, that's how his definition of reality was. It was all about Christ. What can I do to get myself closer to Christ and magnify Christ in my life? That's the whole deal. And if you think like that, it really, for one, I mean, I know people talk a lot about simplicity and how important, what do they call it whenever you get rid of stuff? There's like books and podcasts about it and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's not downsizing.
Minimalism.
Yeah. So people talk about that. Oh, it's good for your mind and it's good for your life. And I'm sure it is. Paul was an extreme minimalist in the things that he cared about and the things that he emphasized in his life. And that's what led him to have joy.
Yeah. That's really good. We need to wrap this up, but I will say this last section that we read 23 through 26 there, when Paul's saying, look, I'm having a hard time deciding, like, and I don't know what this means, like that he kind of had part of the decision to make. Do I want to live or do I want to die? I'm sure Paul could have done plenty to like make this process move faster towards his death, or he could have been patient and let like it work out. But when he says it's better for me to die and go be with Christ, Paul had been through so much.
Yeah.
He's so tired. He's so beat up. Like, I could see him thinking like, I'm ready to be done with all that suffering Jesus said I was going to have to suffer for his sake. But he says, I'm going to stay because it's more needful for you. What I'd really like in my life is just to be done, but I'm going to stay because it's more needful for you.
Yeah.
That's the second best thing I think Paul ever said. The first best thing that he ever said like it was in Romans 9 when he said, I could wish that I myself were accursed, that they might know the gospel about his Jewish brothers. Somebody who understands the love of God is willing to even say things like, if God could let me go to hell so somebody else doesn't have to, I would. Or if I need to go through more discomfort in my life for the good of somebody else, I will. I need to think about what that means for me on a day-to-day basis. How much time am I willing to spend with somebody? How much heartache am I willing to go to help somebody carry their burden? How much frustration am I willing to go through to help my brothers and sisters grow in the Lord? When we're lazy and when we just do things for our own comfort, we completely miss this spirit that Paul has here.
Yep. And that's why that line, to live is Christ, that wasn't just a cool slogan that Paul was living by. He actually was, because Jesus really did do all that stuff that Paul's like, I wish I could do this. I wish I could, give my life for you to save you or whatever. Jesus actually did. And Paul was just doing his best to embody that.
Yeah.
And just like the Spirit provided for Jesus to be raised up from the dead, Paul knew that the Spirit of Christ was going to provide for his deliverance too. And if we can believe that, then we're going to be able to live this way and do some good stuff.
Very good. And Michelle just quoted that to die is gain. Death is a promotion for a Christian. Like, we need to remember that. Yeah. But the principle Jesus taught us is to die in this life too is gain. And typically it's somebody else's gain. When we die to ourselves and like we're sacrificially giving, it's a gain for somebody else in this life. All right, we can talk about this forever. We need to wrap it up, but we'll pick up right here on Wednesday, Lord willing.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for the good comments. We appreciate you.
God bless y'all.
Bye.